the organizers for giving me this honor. In this session, we have two papers, and both are related to the nature of reality. So the first paper presentation will be by Geshema, Tenzin, Lekzom. It is on the nature of reality according to Buddhist philosophy, and the next one will be by Professor Godabarisha Mishra. And as the earlier chairperson has set a precedent that the time should be kept in a rigorous way, so a 20 plus 10, that is the model which we are following. So I request to make her presentation. Yes.
So this morning we got a chance to listen about the nature of reality according to Samkhya and Vedānta philosophy. So thank you very much for your presentations this morning. Now I'm going to be speaking about the nature of reality according to Buddhist philosophy. So I think a lot of you have the paper with you, so you're welcome to follow along as well. So we all want happiness and do not want to suffer. From the second we are born and peer into the vast world around us, we are searching for happiness and satisfaction. Throughout history, the attainment of genuine happiness has been the topic of discussion and analysis by countless philosophers, religious thinkers, and scientists. Our wish for genuine happiness represents our common humanity. In today's globalized world with multicultural communities, it is quite common for people of different faiths, beliefs, races, and ideologies to live side by side. In fact, living in multicultural communities alongside other cultures has enabled individuals to develop tolerance, friendliness, and understanding by recognizing their common humanity. The practice of religion is to develop compassion, affection, forgiveness, tolerance, and self-discipline. These are the essence of all major religious traditions. If individuals practice religion properly, with common sense and without dogmatism, it can provide them with an effective system for developing inner values. As we are gathered here today at the Dalai Lama Centre for Tibetan and Ancient Wisdom, we are reminded of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's outlook towards all. Whether they are presidents or beggars, from this nation or that, of this religion or that, relates to everyone simply as human beings. Since in our quest for happiness and the avoidance of suffering, we are all fundamentally the same. So time is always moving, right? Minute by minute and second by second. As time moves on, so do our lives. While we cannot stop time, we can choose how to use it, constructively or wastefully. And since life is short, it is essential to examine whether our perception aligns with the true nature of reality. Since many of our problems stem from a flawed way of perceiving and relating to the world, it is important for us to examine whether or not our perception accords with the true nature of reality. So today I will be speaking about the nature of reality according to Buddhist philosophy. Some of these concepts may be similar to ideas you have heard before, and other ideas may be distinct to philosophical views that you are familiar with. Either way, there is no need to accept or believe anything that I present today. I encourage you to see if what I have presented really holds up to your own experience of reality, and you can form your own conclusions from that. The Buddha stated, O monastics and scholars, as one examines gold by rubbing, cutting, and melting, so examine well my words and accept them, but not merely out of reverence. The Buddha encouraged us to analyze his words by critically examining, testing, and only then accepting them after seeing its validity. Proper analysis and debate serves as a tool to clarify misconceptions, establish correct views through valid reasoning, and address objections. Through rigorous philosophical investigation, one can gain a deeper understanding and apply these insights to our inner transformation. Only then can we use it to effectively transform our minds. And in this way, even intellectual analysis becomes a form of analytical meditation as well. In the Buddhist teaching, we find a deal of discussion on the nature of reality in terms of the 18 constituents, the 5 aggregates, and so on. If the Buddhist path was simply a matter of faith and cultivating devotion to the Buddha, there would have been no need for him to explain the nature of reality in such technical and complex terms. To investigate the nature of reality, you cannot maintain a point of view simply because you like it or because it accords with your preset metaphysical or emotional prejudices. Just as scientific disciplines place tremendous emphasis on the need for objectivity on the part of the scientist, Buddhism also emphasizes the importance of examining the nature of reality from an objective stance. So Buddhism describes reality through the concept of 2 truths: conventional truth, Samriddhi Satya, and ultimate truth, Paramartha Satya. Although this distinction is not unique to Buddhism, and it's actually a common epistemological concept in ancient Indian philosophical schools, but each of these different schools have their own interpretations of what is referred by the 2 truths. According to the Middle Way school of Buddhism, the ultimate truth or the ultimate nature of reality is the emptiness of all phenomena. In trying to understand the meaning of this emptiness, we can turn to the teachings of the Indian master Nagarjuna, who brought together all the various understandings of emptiness through the single statement that emptiness must be understood in terms of dependent origination. When we talk about emptiness, what we are negating or denying is the possibility of things or events having inherent existence. No thing or event possesses the reality of independence and is therefore thoroughly dependent. The very existence of all phenomena depends on other factors, such as causes and conditions, its constituent parts, and the process of labeling. In our ordinary perception of the world, we tend to perceive things as having some kind of absolute status, as having a concrete or objective reality. If we subject them to deeper analysis, however, we find that things do not exist in the way that they appear to us. It is this absence of inherent existence that is the meaning of the term emptiness. Nagarjuna states, "Whatever is dependently originated, I call that to be empty, and that too is dependently designated, and this is the middle way." First of all, one must understand that emptiness and interdependent origination enhance and do not contradict each other. If one equates the lack of inherent existence with the non-existence of phenomena, then one has lost the point and fallen into an extreme view. However, if one uses the understanding that the lack of inherent existence means that things exist in dependence on causes and conditions and their parts, one has attained or gotten closer to a correct understanding and not fallen into the extreme of nihilism. When you understand that things lack inherent existence, it does not mean that they do not exist at all, but that they exist in dependence in relation to causes and conditions, its parts, labels, and so forth. Since phenomena exist in relation to other phenomena, they do not have an inherent independent existence. So understanding dependent arising becomes a very effective means of understanding the real intent of the Buddha's view of emptiness. So here we have 2 quotes that I will read through. So first we have Nagarjuna's quote that says, "For that reason, that which is not dependently arisen, such phenomena do not exist. For that reason, that which is not empty, such phenomena do not exist." And then we have another quote from Aryadeva, which says, "Whatever exists dependently is not independent. As everything lacks independence, consequently there is no self that exists. When we reflect upon the meaning of emptiness, it is helpful to refer to Nagarjuna's Fundamentals of the Middle Way, where he entertains many objections from those who criticize his central conclusion that no thing or event possesses inherent existence. His critics object that saying nothing possesses inherent nature is a descent into nihilism because it rejects the existence of something. Nagarjuna responds by saying that this objection is based upon a misunderstanding of what he means by emptiness. To paraphrase Nagarjuna, if you just reflect on the fact that the premise upon which I argue for emptiness is dependent origination, that alone reveals that by emptiness I do not mean nothingness. Emptiness is not to be equated with mere nothingness. It is simply the absence of inherent independent existence. What he is referring to is that you arrive at the highest meanings of emptiness through dependent origination. Through this way, you can avoid the extremes of both nihilism, that nothing at all exists, and absolutism, that things possess independent existence. This is the meaning of the middle way. What you normally feel and believe is actually contradictory to the way in which things actually exist. When you think about your own self, you normally feel as there is something that you can actually pinpoint to, which the term person refers to. When you examine this in greater detail, however, you discover that there is actually no such unitary entity to which the term person refers, and that this term is actually contingent upon the aggregation of many factors. In Nagarjuna's 70 stanzas on emptiness, he explains that if one posits the intrinsic existence of all things, then the whole idea of things coming into being becomes absurd. Inherent existence implies some kind of independent, objective reality. If things were independent and objective, they would neither come into being nor cease to be. Furthermore, if phenomena existed by way of their own underlying basis, then no matter what type of entity they were, good, bad, and so on, they would not be altered. If a type of food, for instance, was inherently delicious by way of its own entity, it would not be able to be perceived as unpalatable to anyone else. As Buddha Palita stated in his commentary on Nagarjuna's Fundamentals, if things and events have an inherent, intrinsic identity, we should be able to point at something and say, that's it, without relying on its parts or aggregates. But such is not the case. When we use terms, labels, and concepts, we have to apply them on the basis of the aggregation of many factors. This in itself suggests that things and events do not possess inherent or independent reality. Therefore, when you approach emptiness from the perspective of the dependent origination of things, the fact that things are devoid of inherent existence is brought into a much sharper perspective. The Buddha said, just as a chariot is verbalized, designated, in dependence on that collection of parts, so conventionally a sentient being is set up depending on the mental and physical aggregates. So this example of a chariot is found frequently in Buddhist texts. You find it in the Pali Canon, and it is also in the Sanskrit scriptures as well. So nowadays we don't use chariots that much, we use cars, so we can take this as an example. If we take the example of a car, we usually perceive it as a single independent entity, as it inherently exists. However, when we break it down into its components, hood, engine, wheels, seats, and so on, there is no single part that is the car. When disassembled, the car disappears, revealing that its existence depends on the arrangement of the parts rather than the car itself having an intrinsic essence. This illustrates the Buddhist concept of emptiness. Things do not inherently exist as they appear, but arise through dependent conditions. When disassembled, they are the same parts that they were there when you had a car. You have not taken away any of the parts, and you also haven't added any new parts either. However, the arrangement of the car parts is such that your mind no longer looks at them and says, this is a car. Those same parts are not a car, individually or collectively. But when you put them together in a certain form, all of a sudden you have a car. So we have the conception of a car and we give it a label, and then we forget that we were the ones that created it by giving it a label. Instead, it appears to exist from its own side. Just as a car exists by being merely designated on the basis of that arrangement of the car parts, in the same way what we call me or I or person exists in the same way. The analogy with the car is quite easy to understand. You can see how the car exists just by being merely designated in dependence on the collection of parts. You do not feel too uncomfortable with that. When you talk about yourself being merely designated, depending on the collection of parts, we do not feel too comfortable with that. Yet there is no difference in the process of designation between the example of the car and the example of me. The difference here is that we really grasp strongly at our own selves. Nowhere in that collection of the body and mind is there a me, even though we believe there is. I feel like it exists is not a good reason. We learn in Buddhism that I feel like it must be this way does not count as a valid reason. If you are looking for something, you have to find it. You have to be able to locate it. The 25,000 stanza Perfection of Wisdom Sutra says, it is thus, this bodhisattva is merely labeled. This perfection of wisdom is these forms, feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousness are merely labeled. It is thus, forms are like illusions, feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and the consciousness are like illusions. Illusions are also merely labeled. They do not abide in places. They do not abide in directions. Why? It is thus. Labels are contrived and imputed to the individual phenomena. Labels are transiently designated verbal conventions. All those labels are designated verbal conventions. When a bodhisattva, a great being, practices the perfection of wisdom, he or she does not subsequently view labels as real. Not subsequently viewing them as real, he does not manifestly cling to them. Further, O Shariputra, when a bodhisattva, a great being, practices the perfection of wisdom, she sincerely thinks thus, this bodhisattva is merely labeled. These feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousness are merely labeled. Shariputra, it is thus. For self, for example, is called self, but this vocal expression self is not apprehended. The I and all other phenomena are described in Buddhism as merely designated or merely imputed by mind. In many sutras and treatises, it is taught that all phenomena are only names. However, we can't say a person is a word, and we can't say a car is a word. So when it says that things are name only, it does not mean that the person is only a name, because a name cannot walk, talk, and eat, but a person can. So what it means is that they exist by being merely designated. The conventionally existent person exists by being merely designated. It feels incredibly uncomfortable because as soon as we say I, it doesn't seem like it's just something that exists by being merely labeled. Nevertheless, there is nothing you can find when you search for it. It is only when you do not search that there is the appearance of a person. And when you do search, what appears to be the fixed location of the I disappears. Buddhism also posits that the consciousness that migrates from one life to the next, this consciousness exists. And so even though this continuity of mind does exist on a conventional level, this continuity does not possess the inherent independent existence that we tend to project onto it. This analysis can make us incredibly uncomfortable if it is beginning to really strike at our grasping. It makes us incredibly uncomfortable because we are sure that there is something findable there. There has got to be something that carries the karma from one life to the next. Our mind says, you cannot say that the person that exists by being merely labeled, because what carries the karma in that case? There has got to be something that carries the karma, not just something that exists by being merely labeled. But as soon as you say that there is something there, there's no need to designate it, and it must be inherently existence. But that also does not feel right either. So this is designed to make us feel uncomfortable. And, Buddhism is not deliberately trying to make us uncomfortable, but it is our mind that wants to hang on to something that makes us initially feel uncomfortable. And if your understanding of emptiness is not refined enough, fear may arise in the mind. In this case, there is a danger of sliding into a nihilistic interpretation of the meaning of emptiness, where emptiness also almost becomes a concept of nothingness or non-existence. This can then cause some kind of fear of non-existence, and under such circumstances, it is important to reinforce conviction in the efficacy of the law of cause and effect, and particularly in the teachings of dependent origination, because the true meaning of emptiness has to be understood in terms of dependent arising. So there is a really fine balancing act to refute that very strong I, but still think or know that there is a conventional I that does produce karma and continues to the next life. So this is the hardest point, to find that fine line and negate exactly what does not exist without negating more and without negating less. But we are often extremists, and we easily negate more and we easily negate less. So it is not easy to obtain a correct understanding of the middle way. So here I have a slide with different perspectives from the different Buddhist tenet systems. So there's a lot of information on this slide, so I'll try to just summarize it. So we have the Great Exposition School, Vaibhashika, Sutra School, Sautantrika, Mind-Only School, Chittamatra, and Middle Way School, Madhyamika. So the top two schools, Vaibhashika and Sautantrika, they accept the selflessness of persons, but they do not accept the emptiness of phenomena. But the Mind-Only School and the Middle Way School, they accept selflessness of persons as well as the emptiness of phenomena. And as you go down, the view gets more subtler as well. So concerning the meaning of selflessness, the four philosophical schools of Vaibhashika, Sautantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamika, they all assert that the person lacks self-sufficient substantial existence as the meaning of the selflessness of persons. In addition, Chittamatra asserts the emptiness of subjects and objects as different entities, as the selflessness of phenomena. And Madhyamika asserts the emptiness of true existence as the selflessness of phenomena. So the meaning of the views of the lower and higher philosophical tenets differ greatly in coarseness and subtlety. However, if understanding is developed with respect to the lower systems, this serves as a means of understanding the subtler views. The different views of the four schools of tenets were taught by the Buddha himself in accordance with the mental capacity of his followers. So some of the followers were likely to fall into views of nihilism if he taught selflessness, and for them, the Buddha even taught the existence of a self in some sutras. Also, some followers were likely to go into either the extreme of reification or to the extreme of nihilism if Buddha answered their question in the positive or negative. For them, the Buddha did not say either exists or does not exist, but remained silent, as in the case of the 14 unanswered questions. So there are certain groups of Madhyamika thinkers who accept some notion of intrinsic nature, albeit at the conventional level, but there's another group of Madhyamika scholars who totally reject the notion of inherent existence anywhere, even at the conventional level. So how did this fundamental divide come into being? The foundational texts of Middle Way thought are Nagarjuna's Fundamentals of the Middle Way and Aryadeva's 400, so two distinct interpretations evolved from these texts. Buddha Palita, for example, wrote a commentary on Nagarjuna's Fundamentals and developed a line of interpretation rejecting any notion of intrinsic existence, even at the conventional level. Later, Vaibhashika wrote his own commentary in which he notes that it is our consciousness that is the real defined person and the referent of our personal terms. Again, this indicates that he accepts some notion of inherent existence. Also, when disputing Buddha Palita, Vaibhashika presents an epistemology in his commentary on Nagarjuna's Fundamentals, in which it is evident that he accepts some notion of the intrinsic nature of objects. Svatantrika, Madhyamika follow Nagarjuna's teachings but present their own interpretation of emptiness, accepting a view of intrinsic existence at the conventional level. The fact remains, however, that all Madhyamika thinkers, Prasangikas and Svatantrikas alike are united in rejecting any notion of true or ultimate existence across the entire spectrum of reality. So in this respect, they differ from the Chittamatra school, where a distinction is made between the external reality of matter and the internal reality of subjective experience. Chittamatrians reject the true existence of the external material world, but maintain the true existence of internal consciousness. Madhyamikas, on the other hand, reject any notion of true existence right across the board. So then we have another question that arises, right? So that since emptiness is an ultimate truth, does emptiness itself exist by way of its own essence? And so just as when a phenomena qualified by an empty nature is analyzed, it is not found inherently, so too when this phenomena's empty nature itself is analyzed for its ultimate reality, it too is also not found. Therefore, when one seeks the object designated as an empty nature, this empty nature is also not found. It merely exists through the force of worldly consensus done without analysis. So take a flower, for instance. When we analyze the way it exists ultimately, the flower is not found, but rather ultimate reality or emptiness is recognized. Then when the emptiness of the flower itself is analyzed, that emptiness itself is also not found inherently, but is rather found to be empty. So this is called the emptiness of emptiness. So from the perspective of science, research into how our brains function suggests that sensory inputs do not directly reflect an independent reality. Instead, our brain interprets and processes these inputs, forming our experiences. The brain does not passively receive information from the senses. Instead, it actively constructs our experiences by filling in gaps. Neuroscience research also supports this by showing how the brain predicts and interprets sensory information rather than merely recording it. And optical illusions and hallucinations also serve as examples of how the brain can create experiences that may not correspond to an external reality. So reality is posited to be not a fixed external phenomena, but rather a fluid, brain-dependent construction. And a lot of our destruction emotions are also based on appearances. So research suggests that when we develop anger, for example, then 90% of it is mental projection. And the concept of true truth is also related to quantum mechanics, which I think a few of the scholars discussed this morning as well, suggesting that reality at a fundamental level is not as solid or objective as we assume. So I'm going to skip through this section here because I think we're going a little bit rushed through time. So thank you for joining me on this journey of exploration on the nature of reality. In the end, the nature of reality is not just a question for philosophers or scientists. It is a question that touches all of us. Whether reality is objective, subjective, or something in between, the way we engage with it defines our lives. As is generally the case in Buddhist teachings, we have to subject these ideas to critical analysis and relate them to our own personal experience. So I encourage you to question and explore the nature of reality from your own lived experience.
Thank you very much. The paper is open for discussion. We have about 4 to 5 minutes. Please give the mic.
It was a very good presentation. Only one suggestion is there. You have mentioned Nagarjuna's car, but in the times of Nagarjuna, there was no car. Car, it goes to illusion for this world. That time also car, but it was Rath. So you can use Rath and can give its deliberation or its details. A cart, a distant cart driven by horses in bracket, and then you can use Rath.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Okay.
So that was supposed to be a kind of a more real-life example of something that we see in our daily lives, because we don't see chariots as much anymore. But definitely, in the earlier texts, we don't see any references to a car. They refer to chariots. Here, it was really to make us think about, in our real life, when we see a car and then when we analyze its parts, how can we make sense of, when we label the car versus when we see the parts of the car separately, how do we think about it in our own minds, right, in our daily lives to relate it to that experience? Because I don't know, I don't see chariots that much anymore, right?
No, there is no problem because, what applies to car applies to chariot should apply to a car also. That is the point. Any other question? Yes.
I have a kind of question that sometimes when I talking to the other student, and especially Westerners, and one of the Westerners, the student or a friend, it says about as the Buddhism talking about the emptiness is such kind of subtle and difficult to understand all these things. But when you that he was saying me and others, when you describing to the car, and then like example say without the engines working, without driver, this thing. But it's again like, come on, this is all Westerner people knows there's no engine, so no parts, and what you mean something that's how to relate to the very deep philosophies, because it seems like very obvious kind
Yes.
of. And then how can you how should we describe to kind of little deeper level?
Yeah, I think what you've mentioned is very true. You know, when we talk about car and its parts, even if we talk to a 5-year-old, I think they can understand, right? Like when you separate the parts, it's obviously we're not going to call it a car. So when you talk about it in these examples, it seems like this is something I already know. So what's the big deal, right? You know, what did the Buddha discover after meditating for so many years? But you know, I think intellectually we do understand about separating, you know, the parts and the label we put on it. But a lot of the times, how we live our life and our emotions and habits, we live as though we are not aware of that, right? So this ignorance is so deep that our daily life and our habits and our way of looking at the world is so entrenched in this view of inherent existence that, you know, intellectually we can look at some, you know, examples of things we see in our outside world and think of it in that terms, but the way that our ignorance runs and functions, it's very deep, and that is going to take a lot of time to really contemplate and think about it and remove the layers of this grasping at inherent existence. But, you know, we use these examples of things that we see around us as an example to really begin to think, right? If you use an example that's a bit easier, you know, we sometimes also use the example of the reflection of ourselves in a mirror, right? It appears like us, but we know that the reflection is not really us. So if we use examples that are a bit easier to understand in our daily lives, then we can slowly start to look at the more complex graspings at inherent existence that are in our mind.
Anyway, thank you. Actually, the paper is thought-provoking and many questions may be possible, but because of the time problem, we will go to the next paper. So I will ask Professor Godabarisha Mishra to make his presentation.
Yeah, computer. Done? Now. Yah pratitya samutpadam prapanchopasamam shivam desayamasa sambuddhaha tam vande vadatam varam anaksharasya dharmasya srutihka desanachaka nakaschit kutrachit kinchit dhammo buddhena bhashitam. Most respected Professor Rinpoche, Professor Samten, Professor Gokhalei, and the whole Sangha, including the lay persons like us, I thank the organizers for this opportunity that they have given me to speak on this great holy place. My presentation is from Brahman to Śūnyatā in quest of a shared horizon between Vedānta and Buddhism. I would like to start from where Dr. Nataraju stopped. You know, I would like to quote a thinker of post-Shankara and pre-Ramanuja time era, that is Yadava Prakasa, who says, he says, Yat Sunyavadinam Sunyam Tadeva Brahma Mayinam. He says, whatever Sunyavadins speak about Sunya, the same thing is repeated by Advaitins as Brahman. So the whole thing that I would like to present before you today is to say a deep understanding of Advaita can come when there is a good reading and understanding of Nagarjuna and vice versa. And this is what has happened in the tradition of assimilation, and starting from Gautama the Buddha, Arya Nagarjuna, up to Vachaspati Mishra, you find, and even later, you find this interaction is going on between two traditions, trying to see how much we can take and where we can criticize, and opening for criticism. I think I would be I'll read my paper with this. And one more thing is assimilation. I would like to put my concept of assimilation to say it is not just distancing each other, just putting it inside, but it is with keeping your identity intact. For example, when His Holiness has become so popular, how do we see his popularity? Can we say that his identity as a Tibetan is lost in his assimilation as an Indian and being venerated, respected in each household in India or Asia or the world? No. The identity is kept, but assimilation has brought about a greater respect to the person. What has happened, that is what has happened in Buddhism, and that is, I will try to finish it within 20 minutes. Maybe it is not possible, I'll see. I'll take a little more time with your permission. I'm happy that Professor Gokhalei is the chair today. So the we are great critics of each other, but very good friends. So the thrust of my presentation is to highlight the fact that Buddhism as a philosophical system remained as the lifeblood of Indian philosophy and culture all along, and provided a lot of raw material in building mainstream Indian philosophy. It was Buddhism through its interaction and exchange created new thinking, not by antagonizing Vedic thinking schools, but by questioning and complementing. In not honoring the authorities of the Vedas and standing against the questionable practices in the name of religion and spirituality, Gautama was one among the few, including Jainas and Ajivakas, besides Charvakas. The supporters of the Vedas like Samkhya's were also against immoral, violent practices, and non-believers in a creator's God was from both the sides, adherents and non-adherents of the Vedas. That the Veda had strong difference of opinion with other philosophical traditions of his time does not mean that he rejected all the Vedic schools stood for. He assimilated many facets which the Vedic thinkers championed and rejected those which did not appeal to logic and rationality. Though there were orthodox scholars who have admired him for his clarity. For example, Godabarisha. He says, Tam bande badatam varam. Simplicity and profundity of his teachings. In other words, Buddha has left behind such brilliant philosophical footprints which his successors in both Vedic and non-Vedic traditions could never easily ignore. I always hold the view that Buddhism remained as one of the chief interlocutors which added to the expansion of Vedic philosophical systems. In its desire to reach out to the masses, he carved out different means of liberation and modes of practices. The diversification of Buddhism with their opposing views with one another resulted in developing diverse philosophical framework which resulted in the assimilation and lost the need for a separate existence. This also resulted in the development of certain opposite practices. There was an attempt to deify the Buddha as an incarnation, championing prajna and karuna, incorporating all his philosophical and ethical as well as religious concepts into the other orthodox philosophical traditions. One of the recent trends is to perceive Buddhism as a very different mode of religiosity, which, however, is not good because Buddha stood for harmony and togetherness and unity. However, like Shaivism and Vaishnavism, the Jainism and Buddhism were treated as different representative of the same religion, which may be brought under the broad nomenclature Arya Dharma, Arsa Dharma, Esa Dhammo Sanatana, who Buddha himself says in Dhammapada. So, Nagarjuna, the founder of the Madhyamika school of Buddhism, created a deep connection between Upanishadic Vedanta and his own philosophy of Śūnyatā. The translating the word Sunya is very difficult. I am avoiding, but for the positive of any other word, I am putting voidness. He argued that ultimate reality cannot be described in any way, neither positively nor negatively. It has no characteristic, not even suchness. In fact, the entire world we experience cannot truly be described because nothing in it has its independent nature. With a very powerful and unique approach, Nagarjuna used a method of reasoning to show that everything lacks an inherent nature, nisvabhavata. He did not accept the idea that things possess their own essence, sarvam swalakshanam. That is not what he accepted. If everything is truly void, then even what we see and experience is just an appearance, an illusion of the void. An illusion of the void. According to him, what we perceive in the world is only empirical samvriti satya, while the true nature of reality is the ultimate and absolute truth, that is paramartha, which is voidness itself. Nagarjuna's teachings not only challenged Buddhist ideas, other Buddhist ideas, because Nagarjuna says, I am the best spokesperson of the Buddha, but also questioned other philosophical schools of his time. He proposed the doctrine of non-birth ajatipada, stating that if the world is unreal, it could never have been born. This influenced Godapada and Shankara, who charted out ajatipada and vivartyavada, respectively, as the precepts of the Upanishads. If the world does not exist, then concepts like karma, bondage, and even liberation lose their meaning. Even while criticizing Madhyamika, Shankara adopts such analysis to prove the illusoriness of the world. He criticizes Nagarjuna. In the last sutra, Sarvatha Anupapattescha, he says, Bahyarthavada, Vijnanavada, Sunyavada Tritayam, Itaretara viruddham vadata sugatena spastikrutam atmanaha asambadha pralapitvam. That is what he says. But still, he adopts the analysis, like the analysis which he was talking, sadasad vilakshanatam, all that from Nagarjuna. So Nagarjuna's idea influenced Advaita Vedanta and Kashmiri Shaivism, and in their refutation one sees the influence of Nagarjuna and the way Nagarjuna has helped the philosophical tradition after his time to develop. World, according to him, is illusion created by ignorance, like a dream, swapna tulya. The paramartha, this is a very important question he brought out today. So on the other hand, it is void, which cannot be defined which is only non-dual, not eka, non-dual, hence neither one nor many. For Nagarjuna, the world cannot be described as a non-being, also because the world, for that would imply a fixed, determined idea. Ultimate reality, which is the essence of everything, cannot be defined as either being or non-being. It cannot be both, as they are opposites, and it cannot be neither. That is what my previous speaker has already spoken. I want to skip that. Vijnanavada, the assimilator. I bring Nagarjuna as a bridge builder and Vijnanavada as an assimilator. Vijnanavada, which developed after Nagarjuna, accepts that the teachings of the Hinayana tradition are true in a practical, ordinary sense, that is Samvriti. However, it argues that ultimate reality is pure consciousness, not emptiness, nor suchness. Tathata. According to Vijnanavada, ultimate reality is realized when all in the state of nirvana, which is the state of which that transcends all suffering. The chief argument of Vijnanavadin is that we need consciousness to know the state which is free from suffering. This is the main contention. Consciousness has to be accepted for knowing even whatever you, like the state of nirvana, even since nirvana is a state to be realized, it has to be conscious. For them, this consciousness is pure and free from any mental constructs or specific qualities, because if consciousness attaches itself to specific qualities or forms, it becomes trapped in the cycle of samsara and falls into suffering. Therefore, true consciousness must be free from all distinctions. It is the highest reality described as dharma, bodhi, tathata, and the tathagata garbha, like everything that Buddhists consider ideal. So, Atman encroaching Anatmavada and evolving Mahatman. This is another thing that I would like to bring before this audience. The Vijnanavadin's acceptance of consciousness resulted in the acceptance of Atman in this school. They held consciousness as the highest reality, which resembled like the concept of Atman in Vedanta. This made it easy to connect both the schools. The Vijnanavadins also spoke of the essential reality as Mahanatman, the Asanga, the great self, and this approximated the idea of supreme self, Brahman in Vedanta. In other words, according to Vijnanavadin, a person who attains enlightenment and becomes a Buddha realizes this pure Atman and attains the state of great Atman, that is Mahatma. The Mahatman resembled the Paramatman, and going further, they described it as the Om of Tathagata, the Tathagata Garbha, the source from which all things arise. This idea of the Om can be traced to the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, wherein Krishna explains this process of creation, describing Mahat Brahma as the cosmic womb and himself as the seed giver. Mama Yoni Mahat Brahma. So this concept of supreme being as the womb of the universe was explained by Vijnanavadin as pure consciousness, while the Hinayana Theravada Buddhist rejected the idea of permanent self. The Vijnanavadin only rejected the ego, the sense I rooted in ignorance. In reality, the Atman and the ego are both experienced as I consciousness. However, the pure self, Suddha, is free from ignorance, while the ego, Asuddha, is tainted by ignorance. The ego is like the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayan emerging from dark shadows, appearing impressive but ultimately unreal. A photo she was showing very impressive pictures that. So Theravada and the concept of Atman, even in Theravada, the idea of Atman was indirectly present. The Vastuputriyas and Sammitiyas, two early Buddhist schools held this view. Similar to the Upanishad, the concept of Atman, the Vastuputriyas believed that I must be different from the physical body. This is a very important thing. Or the five aggregates. The Sammitiyas argued that the existence of the soul had to be accepted because the I alone does not see. It is the I, the soul, that truly sees. Without this I, the I would not be able to perceive anything. The Andhakas, I'll skip all these things. So the Asanga and Vasubandhu, the prominent Vijnanavadins explained that a part of the Ala Vijnana, I am coming to Ala Vijnana and Vipaka Vijnana, the two things that has been spoken. Again, stores of impression for the individual and becomes the Vipaka Vijnana, the consciousness that unfolds into the world. The Vipaka Vijnana is considered lower than Alaya Vijnana, which itself is lower than pure Vijnana. In pure Vijnana, all mental impressions are transcended, leading to pure, undisturbed consciousness that is needed. In the Bhuta Tattva school philosophy, a consciousness called Alaya Vijnana is also mentioned. It is seen as a higher state than the storehouse consciousness and equated with suchness, the ultimate reality. This gradual development within various Buddhist schools, including some Hinayana and all Mahayana schools, show how Buddhist thought evolved independently yet moved closer to Vedantic ideas, ultimately leading to assimilation. Santarakita Yogachara School and Epistemological Refinements, Sautrantika Yogachara, developed by Santarakita and his commentator Kamalashila as a separate school, having differences with the views of Vasubandhu and Dignaga. This school mainly followed Sautrantikas in working out its epistemology and Vijnanavada for its metaphysics. For them, the pure Vijnana alone is ultimately real, and that everything else is a form of Vijnana which is in keeping with the Vijnanavada school. But it did not accept Vasubandhu's idea that ultimate consciousness is stable and permanent. It is because if Vasubandhu's position is to be accepted, it becomes identical with Vedanta, and Kamalashila and Santarakita wanted to have a separate identity from that of Vedanta, and Santarakita wanted to differentiate Buddhism from Vedanta by pointing out that Vijnana consciousness is also momentary. Here comes my point. Such a contention is also not without criticisms, because if consciousness which is same as nirvana becomes momentary, the person who attains nirvana remains in that state only for a moment, and this pure consciousness becomes determinate, for momentariness is determinant. To answer this difficulty, Santarakita holds the view that this movement is a timeless movement, without past and present, and hence this has no end at all. So Santarakita applies the concepts of indeterminability and indescribability of ultimate reality to the concept of a movement for saving the ultimacy, absoluteness of nirvana within his framework of Kshanikavada, momentariness. It has been the views across the schools of Buddhism that all the terms denoting highest reality in Buddhism are applied to this absolute movement. So final assimilation with the orthodox Indian thought, orthodox word is somehow missing there. When Asanga and Vasubandhu fully developed the Vijnanavada school, Buddhist philosophy reached a point where it could easily blend with Vedanta. Though some differences remained, the ideas were close enough for Vedanta to absorb many Buddhist concepts. Even the Buddhist understanding of causation underwent significant changes over time. In Buddhism, there are four main views of causation. Number one, dependent origination. Dependent origination again has problem. We cannot not say origination. We have to say emergence. Even emergence is wrong. A lot of discussion needs to be done, worked out on these words, and which has happened in Buddhism also, later Buddhism. Especially in Tibetan Buddhism, a lot of discussion is there. This idea states that every effect depends upon a cause, but the cause must cease to exist before the effect can arise. This means that the cause cannot transform into an effect and cannot serve as the material basis for the effect. Sarvastivadin's view is that an effect is made up of its components which continue to exist as long as the effect lasts. The third, transformation and evolution, the Vijnanavada school introduced the idea that consciousness constantly evolves and transforms, suggesting that changes happen through gradual development. The fourth, unaffected cause, Vivarta Karana, similar to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, this view holds that the highest consciousness or nirvana remains pure and unchanged even when the world appears from out of it. The world arises from consciousness without altering its essence, just as Shankara described Brahman. This is Vijnanavada. The whole idea of Buddha's body also facilitated Buddhism to connect with Vedanta. The Lokottaravadins and Sravakayana believed Buddha's true body was not physical but represented the ultimate truth, nirvana, sunya and dharma. This concept of dharmakaya aligned with Vedantic idea of the ultimate reality. Buddhism's relation with Vedic tenets was complex. From the start, Buddhism accepted many Hindu gods and denied the existence of Supreme Creator God. Though it rejected Vedic sacrifices, Buddhism did accept Mīmāṃsāka's doctrine of karma, which teaches that action shapes the controls individual destinies. Professor Gokhalei does not accept this point. In the beginning of the school, the idea of karma was linked with mental impressions and samskaras. So, the Buddhist idea of Maya, Buddhist idea of Maya, Vidya and Sunya especially in Vijnanavada, we are very similar to Śūnyatā comes in all the traditions. It's another peculiar facet of Buddhism, but that is a very great, profound concept that like a lot of study should be done on that. Buddhism described that these ideas as something as neither is, nor both, nor neither, is something which Advaitins accepted later on to create their philosophical edifice, and the boundary expanded in Advaita, later Advaita also. Even the theistic schools of Orthodox Hinduism accepted the idea of void. See, void is accepted, asat, asadobhada madhura asit, asat is taken as sunya, but in a positive way. This, they viewed it as a state of supreme Godhead before creation, a potential state from which world emerges. This void was seen as the undefined reality before it took to a specific form. As a result, most Buddhist doctrines in India and later sages were gradually absorbed into Orthodox Hindu tradition. Once these ideas were assimilated, there was no longer recognized as distinctly Buddhist, but Buddhist remained. Buddhism remained in and through, like permeated all around the Buddha, like Indian philosophical traditions, as long as conclusion. As all along in the history of Buddhism, the explanation of relation. Yeah, so finished. Like, yeah, okay. I conclude now. Like I conclude with a quotation. Like Murthy's model, I wanted to give Murthy's model, Radhakrishna's model. I don't have time. At the end, it would be pertinent to conclude the relation with a quotation, my person, that the relation between two traditions is difficult to assess, which is spoken by Pausin in his remark, as long as, I quote, we have not ascertained the chronological relations between primitive, he uses primitive word, it is not mine, primitive Buddhism and Upanishadic Samkhya theory he brings, because Samkhya is looked as Vedānta, between the systems of Nagarjuna and Shankara, between Dignaga and Orthodox Nyaya. We cannot boast of even having traced the cardinal lines of spiritual and intellectual history in India. Thank you for patient hearing.
Thank you. It's a thought-provoking paper, and actually many issues can arise from that. So there are only say 5-6 minutes we can have discussions. No. I will not. I will first allow the audience and then.
I have a comment which is actually also a matter of query, in fact. One is that, my comment is that why should we be apologetic about Buddha and Nagarjuna being critical of the Vedic practices? Because the very fact that the Brahmanism took over and everything was turned into a Karma Kanda and a Kriya Kanda, out of which really Buddha comes out very clearly, criticizes and follows his way. Therefore, I think to say that if you are saying that the essence of it was still there in Vedas, which came in a different way, it is a fine thing. But what was operational in that society was not really acceptable to lay persons and thinking persons. Therefore, when the rationality had gone completely, Buddha comes, and that is how brings the rationality and this worldly affairs back. So Nagarjuna is commenting about the philosophy of Brahma and Shunya, in which I am not knowledgeable, but I am only taking this stand. The second point I observe is that if you look at the timeline, the Smriti actually follows a timeline where the epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata come first. And Nagarjuna appears in the 2nd century AD, and Darshana appears somewhere later. And therefore, in this sequence, when we are comparing, I thought that are we confusing the timelines, or it is my understanding that I am not able to comprehend. Because why are we comparing Nagarjuna with Shadadarshana? Because Nagarjuna precedes. There can always be a comparison, But actually the whole Shadadarshana is the defense of the original Brahmanism which comes into place. So I think this is also an interpretation which we should bring in, where we are, fighting for our understanding of the Tattva, which we want to really bring back into our Tantra. So that is my comment.
I am totally in agreement with your first observation. Is it not working? Yeah. I am totally in agreement with your first observation, but for the second, I would like to say, even the Nagarjuna's thinking was not accepted by many. See, Buddhism is an open book. Everybody is criticizing the other. Are you getting my point? But the Nagarjuna, the impact that he left behind was, it is not possible for the post-Nagarjuna thinkers to give him up. In spite of other criticisms, Nagarjuna is not only he's a more of a methodologist. How to do philosophy? He taught first analytical philosopher in the whole world is Nagarjuna. See the analysis, how thread-bare analysis of the philosophical concept you should do, it is only Nagarjuna who tells. So that nobody could come out of it. That is what I am telling. Nagarjuna permeates the whole range of Indian philosophical school. That is what my point is. Like you, I don't agree that the whole they might have something else as their content. They might be fighting with each other. See, Shankara is fighting with his Samkhya, but Shankara takes a large chunk of his philosophical material from Samkhya. But this is what, see, he is accepting Asadva. It's the real Madhyamika, I don't have time, is coming out, the Madhyama Marga, what it is coming out only in the Nagarjuna. Very, very profoundly he names it as Madhyamika.
No.
Yeah.
No, please be brief in your question, because now the time is almost over. Yes.
Nagarjuna was a commentator of Buddha, not a Brahman.
Not a?
Not a God-path or Brahman.
Oh, Brahmin, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So, I cannot connect that Nagarjuna is taking Brahman, concept of Brahman, and then propounding emptiness or voidness. It is not so.
That is not what I am telling you,
yes.
Professor.
But you are taking Brahman word.
No.
Brahman is eternal.
I started with a criticism which Yadava Prakasa said that Yat Yat Sunyavadinam Sunyam Tadeva Brahma Mayinam. There is no difference between Sunya and Brahman. Then this man is only plagiarizing Nagarjuna. He has nothing of his own to present. Yadava Prakasa is criticizing Shankara. So I am taking that as the paradigm to say how the tradition has been continuing. And there is no doubt that Nagarjuna is taking, like he is commenting on Buddha, but Buddha's commentary of Nagarjuna is a very different commentary. All the commentaries are not just like a paraphrases, giving them synonymous. No, he has his own profound thinking in his commentary. It is not just a commentary. Yes, sir.
Last.
Thank you. This whole kind of interrelationship between what influences what, in relation to Madhyamaka, Nagarjuna, and Gaudapada and Shankara is very, very rich, and I'm sure there will be a lot of research that will look at this. One thing that I wanted to suggest is that one way of looking at the history of Buddhist philosophy is to look at it in terms of Occam's razor principle. Buddhism ultimately is a kind of a reductionist. It tends to be metaphysically minimalist, reducing the concept of Atman into the 5 aggregates, and then it goes on, and then there's the Dharma theory, which are then reduced. Then you have the Nagarjuna ultimately rejecting any notion of independent existence, any primitives, as in philosophy we will call any concept of primitives irreducible units of reality Nagarjuna rejects all of this. So from that point of view, in a sense, he's following faithfully Buddha's line of thinking, from Atman to Śūnyatā.
Very.
So if we take that line of thinking, then the suggestion that there is a notion of absolute truth in Nagarjuna becomes problematic.
It is not right.
It becomes problematic.
To tell anything, to characterize Nagarjuna's Sunya is just to tell him in a wrong way.
So the point I'm trying to get at is that for the Brahman, there is a positive affirmative characterization as an absolute.
Yeah.
For Śūnyatā, at least from the Nagarjunan perspective, you cannot attribute any affirmative positive characterization.
Agree.
Okay.
But it cannot be negative also. But that is what I told in the beginning. The Srutihka, Desanachaka, anything you speak, anything you teach will be against the whole concept of Sunya. Saying that it is ultimate or absolute is not what Sunya stands for. And that is in that way it is not reductionist. It is not that point will not come here. Nagarjuna goes beyond all these things and stands at a pedestal where very difficult to question him. Thank you very much.
So thank you all, and I will not make a comment as such. In my personal discussion, of course, I will raise my questions and he will give answers. So thank you very much for giving me this honor.
Hello. Okay. May I now request Professor Meenalji to come up the stage. And our next speaker is Professor Shrinivasa from Delhi. He's not present here. He will be on the online, and let's hope that online will be okay. There will be no problem. So let's hope for that. And thank you very much. Geshela, please start. Okay.
Sarvadrishti Parhanaya Saddhamam Sarvadrishti Parhanaya Saddhamam Anukambam Ubadhaya Tam Kotamam Namami. So the Honorable Sangha community, most respected Samdram Bache, and eminent scholars and friends. So the second session after lunch is on Pramāṇa. We have here the first speaker as Professor Meenal Katarnikar, the professor of Department of Philosophy, University of Mumbai. So her topic is Mīmāṃsāka Nyaya debate on eternalism and externalism. Paratah Pramāṇa and Sotah Pramāṇa. Please.
Yes. Thank you. At the outset, I express my gratitude to the organizers for inviting me in this conference and give me opportunity to learn many things from the scholars gathered here. I will be talking about the debate on Pramāṇyavad in Purva Mīmāṃsā and Nyaya, and I think that offers very profound and enlightening aspects to the general discussion of epistemology. As all the scholars in this hall, they are aware of the Shad Darshanas and the general character of Shad Darshanas. Purva Mīmāṃsā is known as investigation into duty, dharma, in a strict sense, and it offers very significant contribution to the understanding of scriptures, that is Vedas, and elaboration of the nature of karmas vis-a-vis rituals prescribed in Śūnyatās of the Vedas. So the sutras of Jaimini, the commentary on these sutras by Shabara, and voluminous contributions by the two stalwarts, Kumarila and Prabhakara, are the main sources for studying Purva Mīmāṃsā philosophy. Of course, the tradition continues, but I have relied mainly upon Kumarila's Shlokavartika and the previous literature. The objectives of Purva Mīmāṃsā system is to support the Vedic ritualism and offer a systematic delineation of the Karma Kanda portion of the Vedic literature. It achieves its objective in two ways. First, by giving a methodology of interpretation of the complicated Vedic injunctions and making ritualistic process easy to understand. And secondly, by supplying a philosophical justification of the beliefs on which the ritualism depends. So present paper is an attempt to discuss the debate between Kumarila and the Nayayikas on the issue of validity of knowledge, that is Pramāṇyavad. Now why this topic? Because there is something which is, it provides ritualistic ethics, and all the discussion on reality and knowledge enters into the system at a very later stage, at least at the stage of Kumarila and Prabhakara. almost in 8th century. So the articulation of the doctrine of self-validity, Swatah Pramāṇya, was the major part of the later development in order to establish the self-validity and infallibility of the scriptures. In his magnum opus, Shlokavartika, Kumarila presents a very sustained and deep criticism of the non-Vedic traditions, namely Buddhism and Jainism, on various issues. The Buddhist doctrines of Anatmavada, Kshanikavada, Apohavada, Niralambanavada, basically of Vijnanavada, have been examined and refuted. In a similar manner, he criticizes the Jaina principles of Anekantavada, Ahimsa, and their opposition to sacrifice, and mainly their contention about personal omniscience, that is Sarvajna. The main reason for offering such devastating critique of the non-Vedic schools was their prior attempt to ridicule the Vedic texts and the ritualistic ethics. The Buddhists and Jainas have made great efforts to refute the well-established doctrines of Kumarila in their works. So it was really fatal for Purva Mīmāṃsā, which was founded on the supremacy of the scriptures. And hence it seems that Kumarila regarded Buddhists as the main opponents and criticized their views with sound arguments. In comparison with this, his criticism of Nyaya epistemology and the similar other principles is a milder one. Of course, this is not to say that they were in agreement. There were disagreements, but the debate between the two, that is Kumarila and Nyaya, on many issues like Upamana or the philosophy of language, these are well known. But still, all these differences were handled by Kumarila at the level of philosophical disagreements rather than not for a purpose of totally eradicating those doctrines, as is the case with his criticism of Buddhism and Jainism. So, I was little curious about what topic, because it Purva Mīmāṃsā epistemology, that way is very vast topic. They go with 6 Pramāṇas, and in each Pramāṇa they have their own contribution, particularly in Pramāṇas like Shabda or Anupalabdhi or Arthapatti. They have very original theories. But my prime interest being epistemology and the complicated issues in epistemology, I decided to keep aside all these issues and concentrated on Pramāṇyavada, which is one of the technical issues. Moreover, this debate between Purva Mīmāṃsā and Nyaya also reminds me of the debate between internalism and externalism in Western epistemology. So for me, discussing this in this gathering and getting the feedback from the scholars is very important. So, the epistemological discussions center around these 3 main questions: the number and nature of the Pramāṇas, then the number, the genesis or the objective constitution of authenticity, and ascertainment of authenticity. These 3 are the main problems that are discussed in Indian epistemology. The 2 problems, that is genesis or objective constitution of Pramāṇya and the ascertainment of Pramāṇya, they are distinct but related, and they discuss about how the truth of the cognition arises and how it is known to us. These are advanced issues, and on these issues we have 2 camps in Indian tradition. One is Swatah Pramāṇya and the other is Paratah Pramāṇya. More exploration will follow. According to Naiyayikas, no knowledge is authentic on its own account. Its authenticity arises from some special conditions which must operate in addition to the conditions causing knowledge. They argue that if the authenticity of knowledge were determined by the very conditions of knowledge, then there wouldn't arise any possibility of false cognition. But this is not the case, and hence it has to be accepted that in addition to the inherent conditions of knowledge, there must be some conditions which make cognition authentic and some others which make it inauthentic or false. In the same line of argument, they endorse the extrinsic conditions of knowing the authenticity vis-a-vis inauthenticity. According to them, a particular cognition is authentic is also known from an external source, namely the inference based on the presence of special conditions making the cognition authentic. This is argued by Gangesha in his Tattva Chintamani. In the same manner, falsity is also inferred from its own special conditions. They further argue, if the authenticity of cognition was intrinsically conditioned by the conditions of knowledge, there could be no possibility of doubt in any episode of cognition. But that sometimes cognition is doubted and sometimes not is a fact, and that forms a valid reason for holding that authenticity and inauthenticity, that is pramāṇya and apramāṇya of cognition, are known through some special conditions which are external to cognition. This view is known as pramāṇya paratastva vada, or as we know it now, paratah pramāṇya vada, the theory of extrinsic authenticity of knowledge. Kumarila refutes this view and supports his own contention of intrinsic inauthenticity. In his Shloka Vartika, Kumarila discusses four alternative views on the issue: is the authenticity inherent in the cognition or extraneous to itself? So first view is Sankhya view, validity and invalidity, that is truth and falsity both inherent. Second view is the Nyayika's position, truth and falsity both extraneous. Third position is Buddhist position, especially Vijnanavada, falsity inherent and truth extraneous or extrinsic. And last one is Purva Mīmāṃsā position, truth inherent and falsity extraneous. It is needless to say that Kumarila refutes these first three views and offers a chain of arguments in support of his own view. According to him, all cognitions are inherently authentic, whereas falsity is imposed upon it due to defectiveness in its source. It can be said without any hesitation that the doctrine of intrinsic authenticity or self-validity is foundational to Purva Mīmāṃsā system. They assert that all cognition is valid in itself. It clarifies its own truth and does not depend upon any other extraneous conditions or cognitions for its truth or authenticity. For them, validity is conditioned by the very conditions intrinsic to knowledge, and that truth or validity is also known from the conditions of knowledge. Why this view is put forward by them, we can just trace 2-3 reasons for this. Knowledge is essentially a process directed to the ascertainment of truth. And truth is the intrinsic characteristic of knowledge. If knowledge fails to attain truth, it is because of some hindrance which is external and interfaces with the conditions making knowledge possible. So falsity or apramāṇya is externally conditioned, whereas truth or validity is conditioned by the very conditions of knowledge. The contention of Naiyayikas that validity is ascertained through the inference is criticized by Kumarila as subject to the fallacy of infinite regress. Now, I don't go on reading this argument because our learned scholarship here can see what is meant by infinite regress. And third point, knowledge certifies. If knowledge certifies its own validity, how can there be any doubt about the existence or truth of the cognition. Kumarila replies that doubt arises only when there is a positive knowledge of conditions or facts which seem to contradict our knowledge. And in this situation, arguments are necessary. But they are not for establishing the validity. They are required for the removal of doubt or chances of contradiction. There are many serious objections to both Paratah Pramāṇyavada as well as Svatah Pramāṇyavada, and in a way the challenges or arguments are not coming to the end. So the debate between these two vadas, debate between Svatah Pramāṇyavada and Paratah Pramāṇyavada, explores various issues, explores various epistemological aspects, and brings to light that these two systems are offering different paradigms of knowledge and allied concepts. The base of Nyaya paradigm is mainly Bahyarthavad, that is realism, and that too common sense realism. It is specifically the approach of the Nyaya system that all cognitions are caused by the object which is given in the external world. This contention leads them to hold that both authenticity and inauthenticity lie with the extrinsic factor, particularly with the object of knowledge, prameya. Whereas Purva Mīmāṃsā is also Bahyarthavadi, but the base of their theory of knowledge is the need of the system to establish the self-authority of the Vedas. The Vedas are apaurushaya. Their authority cannot depend upon any human agency or empirical conditions. Vedas are intrinsically authentic. The system extends this rule of self-validity and applies it to all sources accepted by them. So Naiyayikas are claiming the source of validity outside the cognition, whereas Mīmāṃsakas are claiming it within the cognition or intrinsic to cognition. Now this has its relation to internalism, externalism debate. And in Western tradition, we have this view, internalism, which is the analysis of knowledge and justification from the point of view of the knower of this or the subject. So internalists conduct their epistemic evaluations from the first person perspective, and they maintain that for a justified true belief to be knowledge, the subject must be able to know or at least believe that his belief is justified. Externalism is the analysis of knowledge and justification from the perspective of the external observer, that is from bird's eye view. And they conduct their epistemic evaluations from the perspective of a fully informed spectator. So according to them, knowledge for a subject, for a knower to have knowledge, the justification condition must hold, but it is not necessary that he is able to know or believe that it holds. A subject can know without any reason to think he knows. Now this is very long debate and it is on even in the contemporary times. It is very obvious that the definitions of these views do not work in the context of Indian epistemology. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't have, because Purva Mīmāṃsā and Nyaya are arguing about the factors intrinsic and extrinsic to knowledge. So the subject matter is very much handled by the scholars, though the definitions are not applying, and the need is to redefine these terms, internalism and externalism, in the Indian context. So one can say that Svatah Pramāṇyavada is Indian internalism and Paratah Pramāṇyavada is Indian externalism. Of course, we have to work on that, and all the scholars are welcome to contribute to this attempt of redefining these terms. One more point about this, and this is the concluding point. We may redefine the terms internalism and externalism in the Indian context, and one may expect that these will be the foolproof or perfect definitions. They will not be perfect definitions, because in philosophy we know how we offer the definitions and we argue upon it. But this way of attempting the definitions and offering the interpretations reminds us again, which the debate touches the issue of the role of a subject, role of a knower in all the epistemic enterprise. From the epistemological perspective, the important question is, what is the role of the knower in the episode of knowledge? The answer given by the Nyayikas can be formulated as follows. We have to formulate this answer for both Nyayikas and Purva Mīmāṃsākas because about subject we don't have any explicit discussion. So the Nyayikas answer can be formulated as the object is the cause of the cognition, the knower is the receiver of the cognition, but a passive receiver. That this is so can be proved with the help of other related aspects. First of all, knowledge is defined as the experience of the object as it is. It is no doubt an experience received by the knower, but without playing any active role as such. And it is confirmed by the Paratah Pramāṇyavada of their system. In the process of validation of cognition, the correspondence between the object and cognition is examined. In a way, confirmation from the side of a knower doesn't seem to have much substantial influence in the process of validation of cognition. So in nutshell, we can say that Nyaya paradigm is object-centric paradigm. Now what is the Purva Mīmāṃsā position? Purva Mīmāṃsā responds to this. While explaining the doctrine of Svatah Pramāṇyavada, Mīmāṃsākas focus on the cognizedness of the cognition. Their main argument is that truth or authenticity is embedded in the cognition while falsity lies outside. However, if there is no knower to cognize that authenticity, the difference between two norms makes no sense, and Mīmāṃsākas will be forced to accept Sankhya view that both authenticity and inauthenticity are embedded in the cognition, which is very close to actually Western internalism. But on the view of Mīmāṃsākas, it has to be asserted that it is the knower who cognizes the cognition to be true and fails to do so when the conditions unfavorable to the truth arise. The cognitive grasp of the knower is a crucial factor in Purva Mīmāṃsā analysis of the intrinsic authenticity of the cognition, though it is not stated explicitly. Redefining internalism in Indian context underlines this requirement that the active role of the knower is highlighted in the Purva Mīmāṃsā theory, and it is not discrepant with the original view of Purva Mīmāṃsā about the logical analysis of knowledge and its authenticity. They may not be a subject-centric school as Vijñānavadin Buddhist or the relativist school as the Jainas articulating partial roles of both subject and object, but that school which asserts active cognitive role of the subject in both obtaining cognition and ascertaining its authenticity. In doing so, they are significantly different from their rivals, namely Nyayikas. So, these are two different realistic paradigms in Indian epistemology. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Did I take
So
more
thank
time?
you very much, Professor Meenalji. So now we will open it. Thank you also for completing it exactly in 20 minutes.
Thank you.
So now we will open the paper for discussion. Please. Any question, comment? Yes. Mic, please. The mic.
Oh, they gave you after my paper was over.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much, Professor. That was really, really educational and informative, because I've always been intrigued by Mīmāṃsā's assertion about the intrinsic nature of the validation of knowledge. So I'm not still quite clear. I can understand if they are coming from a premise where they take the Vedas to be, true source of knowledge, which means then you cannot have an extrinsic factor validating the authenticity of the Vedas. So in which case, Vedas as the source of knowledge has to be intrinsic. So if that is the premise, then from there is the necessity for intrinsicness of the knowledge validation. Is it coming from there and being applied to all episodes of knowledge? Or is it independently argued and then applied to the authenticity of the Vedas as a true knowledge? Which way is it?
It is other way. For them, the prime requirement is to establish, argue for the self-validity of the Vedas themselves. So Vedas being apaurushaya, that means not written by any human or any kind of empirical agency. They are authentic in intrinsic sense of the term, infallible. And this logic has been applied, and that is the supreme source of knowledge for the content of the Vedic literature. But in the empirical life, when we have the 6 sources of knowledge, different sources of knowledge, that model of self-validity has been extended to these Pramāṇas, and they argue for the self-validity of most of our knowledge, and then argue that it is not really the case that there is no possibility of falsity, but falsity enters at some external stage. It is not inherent part of the knowledge. That is the argument. Of course, there can be debates about this. There can be debate about this combination of Swatah Pramāṇya and Paratah Apramāṇya, because that is the position of Mīmāṃsakas. There is debate about Paratah Pramāṇya, Paratah Apramāṇya of Nyayikas, and the 2 other views as well. But thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Professor Gokhalei ji.
Am I audible?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think this debate has something to do with the definition of Pramāṇa also.
Yes.
That is, Mīmāṃsakas, while defining Pramāṇa, don't bring in, yatharthatva.
Yes.
That is, having correspondence with any external world, particularly with reference to Vedas. Vedic statements are about dharma, and dharma is not something which exists outside there.
Yes.
So they define Pramāṇa as the abadhita cognition, which is not falsified, indicative way, and also which gives something new, that is agruhita grahi. So this, there the question of verifying the truth with the help of some external evidence does not arise. If it is new and if it is not falsified, that's all. Then it becomes Pramāṇa. Whereas in Nyaya, this yatharthatva and tadvati tat prakarakam, so there has to be some external object with which it can be compared. So that is important. So that has implications to their definitions of knowledge also.
Thank you. I actually wanted to incorporate that Pramāṇa also, but then 20 minutes is, then I thought debate about Pramāṇyavada is enough. Thank you for that addition.
Yeah, is there somebody out there? Yeah. Professor Mishra ji? Yeah.
Both the schools have like different numbers of Pramāṇa.
Yes. For Prabhakara 5 and Kumarila 6. Yes. And the debates also interesting about Anupalabdhi.
Okay. So now we will move to the second paper. That is Professor Shrinivasa Varakhedi ji. Professor is from Delhi. So since he could not be here in person due to unavoidable reasons, so we are going to have him online. So Professor Shrinivasa Varakhedi ji, can you hear us?
Yes, I am present, sir. And namaskar. Am I audible to all of you? Am I audible? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Sarvebhyo namo namaha. My respects to all present His Holiness and fellow scholars of Indian philosophy. And I'm happy to be part of this international conference held in Dalai Lama Centre for Tibet and Ancient Indian Wisdom, where many scholars have assembled. And I regret that I am unable to travel, and I could not participate in the conference fully uh, to get more benefits from all of you. It is inevitable for an administrator, therefore I'm extremely sorry for that. I understand that I am at loss. Today, I'm not going to read my entire paper on the logic of Nyaya philosophy because the scholars present here are very much familiar with the basic structure and the details of logic of Nyaya philosophy. Therefore, I want to bring certain very important salient features to be noted in the context of inference that is described in the philosophy of Nyaya. So let me start with the note that the reasoning is not at all. It cannot be called as logic because logic has different connotation, and reasoning in India has different connotation because reasoning belongs to the internal observations, and it is a manasa kriya, and it is a process of mental process, and the result of which is generated as a conclusion, judgment in the mind or in the Atman. Therefore, the logic has a different connotation. Instead of that, I would like to call it as reasoning. Okay. And in our own terms, anumana, yukti, linga, upapatti, these are the words that are used to uh, to denote the reasoning. There is one more term which is very, very important term, tarka, which is used in the sometimes in the sense of yukti, but according to Nyaya philosophy, tarka is totally different. Tarka is one of the reasoning. It is not considered to be um, a reasoning in the sense of anumana because it is not at all considered as anumana under the anumana. It is Pramāṇānaṁ anugrahaka. Therefore, it supports anumana, but it is not called as anumana. Therefore, I would like to keep tarka outside the scope of reasoning. And of course, many of Naiyayikas, later Naiyayikas, neologicians have agreed that tarka could be part of reasoning, saying that this could be understood in terms of sadhananumana and dushananumana. The sadhananumana is anumana as regular. Something is proposed to establish something, that is sadhananumana. The reasoning that establishes something. The reason that establishes something is called sadhananumana. The reason that rejects something, that refutes something is dushananumana. Dushananumana is called tarka. Therefore, tarka could be included in the scope of reasoning. This is another view taken by the later neologicians. But anyway, we can understand that anumana, yukti, linga, upapatti, etc. has to be explaining the similar concept. One thing that is to be noted that it is yukti and upapatti are the real original terms, and anumana is a description of anumana. I mean, description. That means it describes the nature of yukti and upapatti. Upapatti basically is justification, And yukti is also a kind of justification. And linga is mark, a sign. For example, if I sitting in my room, if I get to know that through the sound in the sky, in the space, if I get to know that there's a flight is flying on this space, that is considered to be reasoning. That means the flight sound is a mark to infer the flying of a flight. Therefore, this is just mark, and there is a reasoning out based on the mark or sign. This is called linga. So linga jnanam is also one kind of anumana. And now the point I'm making is here. Anumana is a kind of descriptive term for linga because it describes, it is anusrutyamanam. That means this is the instrument of knowledge following something. Something is to be followed. I mean, prior to anumana, there something is needed. Some conditions are there. What are those two conditions? One condition is vyapti, and second condition is pakshata basically. Pakshata and vyapti, these are the two conditions that are required in order to propose any sort of reasoning. Therefore, this is anumana. It follows something. And in the West, we consider that vyapti graha as inductive reasoning. And the second part as linga jnana, post linga jnana, is called deductive reasoning. In Indian Nyayika's theory, the inductive reasoning is called as vyapti graha. It is not reasoning at all. It is just extension of a knowledge. Therefore, it is coming through, in one sense, it is coming through pratyaksha, or it is coming through shabda. It is coming through, it is grasped, this relation of vyapti is grasped through the other sources of pratyaksha, etc. Therefore, we normally don't consider that there is a very strong reason to believe that induction is a reasoning. Induction is a reasoning. For example, I tell you, if somebody tells that if I can perceive a person, an individual, and later I can extend my knowledge to whole class, and this understanding of universal class of a man, or to give an example, if I understand 1 rupee coin or 10 rupees coin, the value of a coin, then I can see, after figuring out many coins, I can figure out the value of that sort of coin. And this extension, understanding of my value of my coin, value of coins of 10 rupees, is simply whether it is a reasoning or it is simply the extension of my understanding through the universal or similarity or the class or the universal property. So simply it is said that this is either bhuyo darshana or through the universal property, that means jati, or through similarity. It is just an extension of our perception. So there need not be any reasoning for induction. So this is one view of Nayayikas have taken, which is very important. Therefore, I would understand that induction as such need not be called as the reasoning. But how vyapti is understood, there is a detailed debate that is that can be seen in our Nyaya works, including Gangesha's work on vyapti, and I don't go into the details. The second point I would like to make is, many a times just by anumana we get confused. For example, if one is noted and through the similarities something else is also identified, then we are confused with that sort of knowledge as anumana. So that is called upamana in Nyaya. So that need not be reasoning. So through similarity, if we understand something, that is called upamana. That is kept outside the scope of anumana. The second point is through some relation. If I recollect something, for example, after looking at one's dog, if I remember the owner of the dog, that is just recollection through the smriti recollection. I mean, there is an ownership relation. Like, morning time, I walk, then dog is seen, the owner is not seen. If I recollect the owner, that is not reasoning. It is just recollection or smriti through the relation, ownership relation. Therefore, many a times these are included in reasoning in many places, but this is to be excluded. But then what is the reasoning? Reasoning is very clearly Nayayikas would take whatever is established through the Vyapti relation, that is to be understood as Anumana, nothing else. So Vyapti is very basic relation for establishing an Anumana, inference. So there are two important factors for reasoning. That is, one is Vyapti and second one is Pakshata. Nayayikas are realists. Therefore, the entire ontology of Nayayikas would govern the epistemology of Nayayikas. Therefore, the epistemology of Nayayikas cannot be applied to in the philosophies or in the arguments where the proponents or opponents are not realists. Therefore, many a times we see that there are a lot of contradictions that are experienced while applying Nyaya theory of epistemology on the real-time examples. Because if the opponent or proponent he belongs to the realism, then he may accept the philosophy of or the process of inference or process of entire epistemology of Nayayikas for his arguments. This point also I don't go into the details because how ontology of Nayayikas would govern the epistemology of Nayayikas. This is one important aspect. Therefore, when Vyapti relation is one such relation which is proposed by Nayayikas on the basis of Samanadhikaranya, co-location of two terms, co-location of two, for example, Hetu and Sadhya, these two are to be located in the same premises, same location. This co-location is required, coexistence is required, and niyama is required. So niyama means there is a binding, there is a invariable concomitance, invariable condition. That means if one does not exist, the other cannot exist. So this sort of existential relations, binding with existence, is also very important, and only realists can establish these two ideas. One is co-locatedness. The second point is the dependency of the two conditions. One is dependent on the other. For example, smoke is dependent on the existence of the smoke is dependent on the fire. If this is agreed, then you can establish Vyapti relation. If this is not agreeable, then you cannot establish Vyapti relation. So, two conditions. Fire resides in the same location where fire resides. They are co-located. And the existence of the smoke is preconditioned. Existence of the smoke is preconditioned by the existence of the fire. If these two conditions are not satisfied, then you cannot establish the Vyapti relation. So this Vyapti relation itself is is a binding for the opponent or proponent to accept that Nyaya, because the Nyayikas are realists, they can establish this. This is one important thing that is to be noted. The three problems I would like to place before you, three challenges that Nyayikas would always face among the philosophers while presenting their reasoning aspects. One is the dhuma and smoke and fire relation. After several observations, we come to know that where there is a smoke and there is a fire. And without fire, smoke cannot come into being. Therefore, if there is no fire, there is no smoke. Smoke exists, therefore fire exists. This is the reason. What exactly is reasoned here? What exactly reason? We are only accessing the existence of the smoke. The person who perceives the smoke cannot perceive the fire because he is sitting somewhere else and he is only looking at the fire, looking at the smoke, and then he is inferring the existence of the fire. Therefore, he is unable to perceive the fire. He is only able to perceive the existence of the smoke. One thing is pratyaksha is there, pratyaksha smoke. And then what he is inferring, whether he is inferring the fire. One thing we should understand, the fire cannot be inferred. Why? Just because of smoke and fire, these two have the relation. Therefore, if at all, after getting the existence of smoke, definitely anyone who has an idea of fire will get to know there exists fire. This is simply a smriti, recollection. This is smriti. If smoke triggers fire, this is smriti. Then what is inferred? Fire is not inferred. The fire is inferred on the hills. That means the fiery hill, the relation of fire in the hills is inferred. How? Because when I look at the hills, I don't see the fire, but I see the smoke. The smoky hill is seen, and the fiery hill is inferred. That means the location has the fire. This kind of Parvata Vanhi Sambandha is unknown. Vanhi is also known. Fire is known. Parvata is known. And Parvata Vanhi Sambandha is unknown. Therefore, the inference part, that the relation of Sadhya Paksha Sambandha is inferred through the relation of Sadhya Hetu Sambandha, that is Vyapti. Through the relation of Vyapti, I can see the Parvata, location I am seeing. In the location, I can also see the Hetu, smoke, and I know that Hetu has some relation with the Sadhya, that is Vyapti. This is also known. Therefore, I know Parvata through Pratyaksha, Hetu through Pratyaksha, Vyapti through my Smriti. Through Vyapti, even fire is Agni. Vanhi is also my Smriti. It is coming from my Smriti. It is not inferred. But the relation between the fire and the location, Parvata, is totally unknown. Therefore, it is inferred. So, many times in the inference, people get confused that fire is inferred. The fire is not inferred. Fire in the hills is inferred. So, this relation part is unknown. Therefore, this is inferred. This is very important aspect. Now, the point I'm making here is the entire Vyapti relation, if you see, Nayayikas, it is considered, they are considering only the co-location. I mean, Adhikarana they are considering, and they are not considering the temporal relation. Temporal relation between the smoke and fire, because fire, the smoke comes after fire. That means first in moment when fire comes, after second and third moment, smoke comes. Why? It is simple Karyakarana Bhava is there. They cannot coexist in time. They can coexist in the location. Therefore, Naiyayikas always considered the coexistence in location, in one location, is the part of Vyapti, not the coexistence of these two in the time. Therefore, Samana Kalikatva is not included. Samana Deshikatva is included. So through that, I can only infer the relation of the location, not the relation of time. I cannot infer that today morning I have seen the fire, therefore I have seen the smoke, therefore fire must have existed before that. I should be able to tell this, but every inferer will tell this. Every inference gives us information that once the smoke is seen, not today, but before the existence of the smoke, the fire must be existing. This sort of inference is not possible through Naiyayikas inference. Therefore, this information is missing. This one challenge, one problem they face. The second problem is with related to co-location. Samanadhikaranya is not possible everywhere. For example, if you consider there is, when you look at the river flow in the downtown or down the hills, river flow in the down the hills, you can infer the raining on the top. That means adhodeshe nadi purvat urdhadeshe vrishti. This is possible. But now the point is urdhadesha and adhodesha, these two are different locations. And the Nadipura, the flow of river, is located somewhere else. And the Ushti, raining, is located somewhere else. And they are in different time zones, different location, different time zones. Now this influence is possible. But how does Nyayika would place this argument of a common man into his own syllogism? He would say that I would come with one paksha and then I would relocate the entire reason. I mean, hetu I relocate into my own location. This is absurd. This kind of absurdity we can find because of some conditional things with the Naiyayikas argumentation. This is another problem they face about with regard to the co-location rule. The third point is pakshata, because pakshata is defined as sadhya sandeha. There should be a doubt before your reasoning, or you should have some sort of desire to establish something, sishadhaisha, then pakshata exists, then only you can reason. This is quite impossible. Sometimes if I say I am sitting in the room and suddenly something is sound is outside, external sound is heard, then immediately I would infer that something has happened outside. That doesn't mean that I would have reasoning. I would have any sishadhaisha, sadhya sandeha. Therefore, these are the issues that we find. Lastly, Nyaya syllogism follows Panchavayava Vakya, and that means all five limbs of argument should be consistently placed before arguing anything for reasoning, for parathanumana. But this is again debated with the Buddhists, because where they agree only with the three, we can complete the syllogism. So I would end here. Last point I would like make, and if I'm permitted by the chair, sir, Naiyayika's Anumana is Swatah Pramāṇa. And many people won't agree this, but this is my own argumentation here. Naiyayikas ultimately, even the Gangesha has ultimately said that in the context of a sound reasoning, samarthanumana, yatra pakshadharmata and vyapti are very sound, very much established. There Anumati becomes Swatah Pramāṇa. Just now we were discussing about Paratha Pramāṇa and Swatah Pramāṇa. There they don't agree that Paratha Pramāṇa is possible. Because simply we understand this where the Vyapti relation is very much sound. For example, I would give one a small example. If the number 2 is greater than 1, number 2 is obviously greater than 1. Therefore, any number added by 2 shall be greater than any number added by 1. Very simple reason. Because 2 is greater than 1, any number multiplied by 2 shall be the greater than any number multiplied by 1. Simple. But this is there we don't seek any external evidences. This is Swatah Pramāṇa. Therefore, where the Vyapti is very correct and sound, we need not seek for any external evidences for. Therefore, Anumana only Swatah Pramāṇa. So in Anumana, in the context of Anumana, Nayayikas would agree that this is Swatah Pramāṇa. With this, I would end my talk, and I would thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
So we will take a couple of questions, because he wanted to present some of the challenges, and I wanted to complete those challenges for proper information and complete information from his side. I have I have a question. Then you said that the Hetu and Kala, Deshatva, Samana Deshatva and Samana Kalatva, it has to be, they have to have, these two properties, right? So how can cause and effect have a Samana Kalatva? It can not only in terms of inference, but also in reality, in their, the process of the origination. The Saman Kalatva is not possible. So how you would say that there is a need of Saman Kalatva? Saman Deshatva is okay.
Question. This is the challenge they face actually. This is the real challenge. Because as a Nayayika, I face this problem. I face this challenge. But this Kala is also considered to be a Desha. This is again, Kala is also in one point of time, Kala is also considered a Desha, and Samana Desha. In Kala, we consider them, both of them are co-located. Therefore, we don't face this problem. Because Kala is also base for everything. Sarvadhara Kalaha. With that, we close this argument.
Any question? Yeah. To Kishatuddin Jimbala, please.
Professor, thank you so much. Since you really have, Nyaya logic is one of the most difficult aspects, technical aspects of Indian philosophy. In Buddhist logic too, when it comes to the form and structures and everything, Buddhist logic also owes a lot to Nyaya. That's a historical fact. So being a specialist in Nyaya logic, you did allude to the contrast between inductive versus deductive reasoning. So with this in mind, in terms of in Western philosophy, logic has nothing to do with epistemology. Logic is purely the form of the argument. Okay? So in Indian philosophy, whether it is Nyaya or Buddhist, the reasoning is very tied to epistemology. It's a process of knowing. It's really in the service of inference. So the emphasis on the formal structure and the argument's authenticity deriving from the structure doesn't seem to be spelled out. So are there any attempts on the part of Nyaya specialists like yourself who are trying to tease out the formal structure that is independent of inference? Is there any attempt, or is it not possible?
In fact, that on the basis of the process of knowing, as you said, we have formulated, we have tried to formulate the logical arguments, and of course formal structures of logical arguments, and which are which don't go into in contradiction with our ancient wisdom. Therefore, I myself have tried. It is in the similar way, because later Nayayikas, as you know, have tried to formalize the thinking in terms of Shabdabodha, in terms of technicalities of Shabdabodha. With the help of that Shabdabodha process, we have tried our best to formulate, give the formal structures to the thinking process. That is done. You can verify that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we are a little bit behind time. So I would like to thank Professor Meenal ji and Professor Śūnyatā ji for their very informative and thought-provoking papers. So, and also very much thankful to the audience and the scholars who have raised questions and made comments. So, and also very patiently listening and being with us in the last session. So thank you very much. So I won't, spare more time in speaking on this topic. Thank you very much to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And we have now finished the last session of the first day successfully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geshela and the two speakers. After this, we have a photo session. So we are going to have a group photo outside this here. So everybody is requested to come over there and have for the photo session. And after that, all the delegates, we are going to the site, the site of the central, the Center for Dalai Lama Centre for Tibetan and ancient Indian wisdom. So